They expected the wedding to end in blood. What no one predicted was that by the time snow fell, the Duke of Ravensmoor would be standing at the gates of his ancestral enemy, refusing to let them take her back. Because Elara Hasting had arrived at his estate as payment for peace, a bride no family wanted and no man had chosen. But somewhere between autumn and winter, she had become the one thing he could not afford to lose. The marriage contract arrived in silence, delivered by a messenger who would not meet anyone's eyes. Elara knew what it was before the seal broke. Her father's face told her everything: the tightness around his mouth, the way he set the parchment down without reading it aloud, the careful absence of her mother from the room. "The Ravensmoors have agreed to terms," he said quietly. Elara's hands stilled over the embroidery she had been pretending to focus on. "What terms?" Her father looked toward the window rather than at her. "A marriage alliance. To end the feud permanently." The words should have carried hope. For 3 generations, the Hastings and Ravensmoors had destroyed each other through violence, legal battles, and territorial disputes that had consumed fortunes and lives alike. Peace should have been a gift. But Elara understood immediately why her father could not look at her. "They asked for me specifically." He nodded once. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it, though she already knew the answer. She was the daughter no one discussed at gatherings, the one whose existence families remembered only when politically convenient. At 26, she had been quietly dismissed by every suitable match her parents arranged, not because of scandal or impropriety, but because of something far worse in aristocratic circles. She was forgettable. Her father finally met her gaze, and what she saw there was not cruelty but exhausted pragmatism. Because the Duke of Ravensmoor made it clear he wanted a wife who would not expect affection. Someone who understood the arrangement was purely strategic. The words landed with clinical precision. "He requested someone unwanted," Elara said softly. "So I would be grateful for the match." Her father did not deny it. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in a ceremony so coldly formal it felt more like a treaty signing than a union. Elara wore white because tradition demanded it, though the fabric felt like a shroud. Her family attended with carefully neutral expressions. The Ravensmoor guests watched her with the detached curiosity people reserve for unfamiliar objects acquired through negotiation. And the Duke, tall, dark-haired, perhaps 30, his face carved from the same stone as his estate, stood beside her and spoke his vows with the inflection one uses when signing legal documents. He did not look at her once during the entire ceremony. Afterward, as carriages prepared to carry her away from everything she had known, Elara's mother pressed a handkerchief into her palm. "Do your duty," she whispered. "That is all anyone expects." The words were meant as comfort. They felt like erasure. Ravensmoor Hall rose from the northern moors like something built to withstand siege, all gray stone and narrow windows, surrounded by land so vast and bleak it seemed to swallow light itself. When Elara's carriage finally stopped before the main entrance, the Duke was already waiting, his expression unreadable. "The East Wing has been prepared for you," he said without preamble. "You will have your own rooms. I do not expect us to share quarters." Elara stepped down carefully, her traveling cloak pulled tight against wind that cut like glass. "I understand." Something flickered in his expression then, too brief to identify. "The household will answer to you in domestic matters. Otherwise, I ask only that you do not interfere with estate business." "Of course." He turned to leave, then paused. "There will be a formal dinner tonight. Afterward, you may do as you please." And with that, he walked away, leaving her standing in the courtyard of a house that would never be a home, bound to a man who had married her precisely because he did not want her. The dinner was worse than the wedding. The Duke sat at the opposite end of a table long enough to seat 20, and they ate in silence broken only by the precise clink of silverware against porcelain. Servants moved like shadows. The food was excellent and tasteless. When it ended, Elara excused herself and found her way to the East Wing, where rooms had been decorated with expensive impersonality, beautiful things arranged by people who did not know her and did not care to. She stood at the window looking out over moorland disappearing into darkness and allowed herself one moment of complete honesty. This was her life now. A marriage without warmth. A title without meaning. A husband who had chosen her specifically because she would not demand what he could not give. And somewhere in the vast cold house behind her, The Duke of Ravensmoor sat alone in his study, staring at the marriage contract he had offered himself, wondering why his new wife's quiet acceptance felt worse than anger would have. Neither of them knew that winter would change everything. The first crack appeared 3 weeks later, during a storm that turned the moors into something biblical. Elara had been exploring the parts of Ravensmoor Hall no one told her to avoid. The oldest corridors, the library that smelled of leather and time, the conservatory where winter roses grew in defiance of the season outside. She was kneeling beside a struggling plant when the Duke found her. "That section has been dying for months," he said from the doorway. Elara did not startle. She had grown used to his sudden appearances, the way he moved through his own house like a ghost. "The drainage is wrong. The soil stays too wet." He stepped closer, curiosity breaking through his usual distance. "You understand horticulture? I understand neglect." She said it without accusation, fingers carefully loosening root-bound soil. Things suffer quietly when no one pays attention. The silence that followed felt different than the empty quiet of their dinners. He watched her work with a focus that suggested he was seeing something unexpected. The estate manager said it could not be saved. Elara glanced up at him. People often say that about things they have not tried to understand. Their eyes held for one suspended moment. Then the Duke turned sharply and left without another word. But the next morning, new soil and proper containers appeared in the conservatory. No note, no acknowledgement, just evidence that someone had been listening. The changes came slowly after that, so gradual Elara almost missed them. The Duke began taking meals in the smaller dining room instead of the formal hall. He asked her opinion on household matters, then actually implemented her suggestions. Once, she found him reading in the library at the same time she was, and instead of leaving, he simply nodded and remained. They did not speak often, but the silences became less empty. Then the letter arrived. Elara was reviewing linens with the housekeeper when a messenger interrupted, his expression carefully neutral as he handed the Duke a sealed envelope. She watched his face change as he read, not dramatically, but enough. "Leave us," he said quietly. The servants departed instantly. Elara moved to follow, but his voice stopped her. "This concerns you." She turned slowly. The Duke stood with the letter held loosely, his jaw tight with something that looked dangerously close to anger. "Your family wants you to return for the winter season. They believe your presence at Ravensmoor is no longer necessary now that the peace has held." Elara's heart stuttered strangely. "I see. They suggest the marriage has served its political purpose, that you might be happier in less isolated circumstances." The careful phrasing could not hide what was really being said. They wanted to take her back because they had found another use for her, another alliance to broker, and a wife trapped in a cold marriage was now an inconvenient complication. "What did you tell them?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The Duke's gaze fixed on her with an intensity she had never seen before. "I have not replied yet. Because you are considering it. Because I do not know what you want." The honesty of it struck her silent. For a moment, neither moved. "If you wish to go," he said carefully, "I will not stop you. But if you choose to stay." He stopped, something unfinished hanging between them. "If I stay," Elara prompted. His expression shifted, walls lowering enough to reveal something raw beneath. "Then I will answer them accordingly." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the entrance hall, raised voices, the sharp sound of boots on stone. The Duke moved instantly toward the noise, Elara following. They found her brother in the foyer, flanked by 2 armed men, his face flushed with cold and arrogance. "The family has decided," Marcus announced without preamble. "Elara returns with us today." The Duke went very still. "That is not your decision to make. She is a Hasting. This marriage was an arrangement, nothing more. You have what you needed. Peace. We have other uses for her now." "Other uses?" The Duke's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You speak of your sister as though she were property." Marcus's smile was thin and ugly. "She is family, which means she belongs with us, not buried in this frozen wasteland with a man who never wanted her in the first place." The words hit precisely where they were meant to. Elara felt something inside her crack open. All the careful composure she had built around her hurt suddenly too fragile to hold. But before she could speak, the Duke stepped directly between her and her brother. "You are mistaken," he said, each word carved from ice and fury. "About what I want." The entrance hall had gone absolutely silent. Marcus stared at the Duke in obvious confusion, while Elara stood frozen behind him, her heart beating so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "You married her out of obligation," Marcus said slowly. "Everyone knows. I married her because your family offered her as the price of peace," the Duke interrupted, his voice cutting clean through the protest. "What I failed to understand until recently was that I received far more than I deserved." Elara's breath caught. Marcus recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "Regardless of sentiment, the family has voted. She returns to fulfill her duties to the Hasting name. Her duties are here now." The Duke's posture had shifted into something immovable. "As my wife, as the Duchess of Ravensmoor, if your family requires political leverage, I suggest you look elsewhere. You cannot seriously intend to keep her against the family's wishes over a marriage neither of you wanted." "I cannot speak for what my wife wants," the Duke said quietly, "but I can speak for myself, and I will not allow her to be traded like currency a second time." Marcus's face flushed dark with anger. The contract established a marriage. It did not include terms for dissolution at your convenience. The Duke's gaze had gone cold in a way that reminded everyone present exactly why his family had held power for generations. "You will leave my home. Now." For a moment, Elara genuinely believed her brother might refuse. The armed men shifted slightly, hands moving toward weapons. But the Duke did not flinch, and something in his absolute certainty made further challenge impossible. Marcus turned his glare toward Elara. "You are making a mistake." "No," she said, her voice steadier than she had ever heard it. "I made a mistake believing I had to accept being unwanted. I will not make it again." Her brother left with his men, their departure marked by slammed doors and muttered threats. When silence finally returned, Elara found herself alone with her husband in the vast entrance hall, her hands shaking with adrenaline and something far more complicated. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. The Duke turned to face her fully for the first time since her brother's arrival. "Yes, I did. They will cause trouble. Politically, socially, let them." He stepped closer, and she saw something in his expression she had never allowed herself to hope for. "Elara, I brought you here because I convinced myself I wanted a marriage without complication, without expectation, without the risk of—" He stopped, choosing his next words carefully. "Without the risk of caring too much and losing everything again." Her throat tightened. "Again, I was engaged once before. Years ago. She died before the wedding." The admission came quietly, each word costing him. "Afterward, I told myself control was safer than connection. That distance prevented pain." Elara understood then. The coldness had never been cruelty. It had been armor. "So you asked for a bride no one wanted," she said softly, "because you thought it would matter less." "I was wrong." His voice dropped even lower. "It matters more than anything I have felt in years. And somewhere between watching you save dying roses and defending servants, and choosing to stay even when staying must have felt unbearable, I stopped being able to imagine this house without you in it." Tears blurred her vision. "I thought you regretted the marriage." "I regret how it began, not what it became." He reached for her hand carefully, as though afraid she might pull away. "If you choose to stay, it will not be because a contract demands it. It will be because I am asking. Because I want you here. Because you are not unwanted, Elara. You never were. I was simply too afraid to admit what it would mean to want you." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him, and let herself speak the truth she had been guarding for weeks. "I do not want to leave." Something in his expression cracked open. "You are certain? I have spent my entire life being chosen last or not at all. You married me for strategy, not affection. But you listened when I spoke. You changed things to make me comfortable. You defended me against my own family." She stepped closer. "So yes, I am certain." He pulled her carefully into his arms then, the embrace tentative at first, then tightening as though he had finally given himself permission to hold on to something he had been afraid to want. "I cannot promise perfection," he said against her hair. "I do not want perfection. I want honesty. Then I will give you that." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Every day? Starting now." The winter that year was brutal, but inside Ravensmoor Hall, something had shifted permanently. The Duke still worked long hours managing his estate, but now he sought Elara's company afterward. They took meals together in the small dining room. He asked about her day. She challenged his assumptions. They argued occasionally, but never cruelly. And slowly, the house that had felt like a prison became something neither of them had expected. Home. Years later, when people asked how the great Hastings-Ravensmoor feud had truly ended, most pointed to the marriage contract. But those who knew the Duke and Duchess personally understood the real answer. It ended when two people who had been chosen for strategy chose each other instead. And when a man who had sworn never to risk his heart again stood at his gates one winter morning and refused to let anyone take back the only thing that had ever made him whole.